Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Home to Hear. I'm so excited that this is episode 10. We're in the double digits, guys. And as you know, at Home to Hear, we talk to adult immigrants about their journey from home to here. So, home being wherever they are born or they grew up to wherever they are in the world today. And I'm really excited to have today's guest on because she is a real life journalist. So, guys, if at any point you see her taking over the interview,
I won't do that, I promise.
I'm excited to be doing this. I'm also very nervous because Lindy is the real deal. And as we unpack her story more, you'll understand what I mean by that. So welcome, Lindy. Welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
I am very well. Thank you, Tianya. Thank you for having me on your podcast, and congratulations for getting to episode 10. That is an achievement. Well done.
And I've already said this to you before we started that like you were the person I wanted as the first guest. So to have you as the 10th guest is, it feels like a really full circle moment. I've been preparing for this moment.
Well, it's an honor to be a guest. And maybe it's lucky number 10. This is a good place for me to be. I feel comfortable, like ensconced between some other great people that you've had on the show. And I think it's just going to get bigger and better from here on. So all the best to you.
You know what? When Trevor comes on, I'll
Yeah, exactly.
But today it's about you. So, Lindy, where are you talking to us from today?
I am talking to you from Washington, D.C. I live in Columbia Heights. Yeah, so right in the northwest quadrant of Washington, D.C.
And do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself and maybe how you, and where are you from? Where's home for you?
So home is South Africa. But I've been living outside of South Africa now for about 8 years. I left in 2015 to start a job in Kenya, in Nairobi, Kenya. I went there as a news anchor for China Global Television News. And initially my first contract was 6 months. And so I thought maybe this wasn't going to be a long-term thing. I thought I'm packing my bags. I'm going to Kenya. I'm going to have an adventure and then I'll be back home soon. But I ended up staying there for 7 years. And eventually in 2022, I moved here. And now it's been a year in DC. And yeah, just sort of in the early stages of year 2. I see myself here for a little bit longer. But ultimately, I think there is already a pull towards going home at some point, which I can feel. But I'm happy to be where I am. This is a good place to have landed. And I'm beginning to understand the city better now that it's year 2.
Yeah.
And I'm quite enjoying it. Yeah.
So, Lindy, thank you for giving us that introduction. There's so many things that we're going to dig into as we continue this discussion. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Tell us about your life and growing up in South Africa.
Okay. Well, I was born in the early 80s, without giving away my age, in Mabopane, just outside Pretoria. And I spent most of my early years there with my brother and my father. My mother had passed away when I was very, very small. So I was kind of raised by my dad with my brother. And my father eventually remarried when I was around 8. And that's when we moved to Midrand and lived there for a couple of years. When we started moving around, I went into boarding school, but I stayed at the same school in Pretoria my whole life. And after school, I went to university. I went to Rhodes in Grahamstown, now known as Makanda. And I studied journalism there and drama. I had ambitions at the time of becoming a famous actress. I thought Generations was waiting for a new cast member.
They missed out their loss.
Exactly. But unfortunately, that wasn't to be. My father steered me into the direction of journalism, and I'm glad he did. In the end, it turned out to be where I was very, very happy, actually. I worked in radio at 702 for a short time. I worked in television at ENCA for a number of years before moving to Kenya, where I worked at CGTN. So, yeah, journalism really became my path, and it helped me. Yeah, it really became the path that shaped, or the career that shaped my path in life and led to me, leaving the country and exploring the world and just seeing so many different places and meeting many different people and just engaging with people in very important conversations in very interesting ways. in radio and in television, and I did some print work as well. I did some podcasting as well. But I've really, really enjoyed that career. It suited me well, and I'm glad that it was such a huge part of my adult life. I miss
I
it
mean,
sometimes, but yeah, it was a good run.
and the voice that you have, I think everyone who probably listened to this will have picked up at this point the velvet voice. I think your voice sounds like just the smoothest velvet, and your voice, your demeanor really does lend well to the field that you're in. So Dad made the right call.
Thank you. I'll tell him. He'll be very happy to hear that.
No, you can just share this episode with him.
Yeah, that's true.
And maybe just coming back again to the time, growing up in South Africa. I was also raised for a period of time by a single dad. So shout out to the dads holding it down.
Yeah.
How do you, what are like the elements of that period, your childhood and, coming into, I guess, to your time in boarding school? How did that period really shape you? And when you look back, what are like the tenements or like the pillars that you see that came from that period specifically?
Mm-hmm. Radio 2000, Africa, right? But we invented our own radio station called Radio 5000.
Okay.
And it was, my father had bought us a tape recorder. And so we used to use this tape recorder to record our own radio shows. And my brother was a DJ on the radio show, and I was the newsreader. So that's where this idea of me sitting and reading the news had actually started from, because I was the newsreader for Radio 5000. And I think my brother may have planted the seed that led to a career in journalism. And it was a confusing time. I think it was, it's the 80s in South Africa. A lot was changing. And I think my memories of that time are thankfully filled with just love and support, and a sense of a real closeness in the small unit that we had as a family, which, over years grew and extended to a bigger, beautiful, bigger family. But I felt very grounded in that relationship, in that little trio. And I think it's, maybe a lot of who I am today is attributable to that little trio and how close we were, in those days.
Thank you for that. Thanks for sharing that. And something that you spoke about is that, you were growing up in the 80s in South Africa. When did you feel or sense that like this society is challenged? And did you feel that journalism could be the way that you would contribute a solution, or at least find out more about what's going on? How do you think growing up in South Africa and that time also informed the type of career that you thought you could have? Because does that resonate to you?
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, there were lots of states of emergency during that time in the 80s. And I recall that those were days when we didn't actually go to school because it was actually too dangerous to drive through the township to get into where I went to school. My father worked really hard to get my brother and I into Model C schools, or in fact private schools, quite early on. He was of the belief that the only way that these children were going to survive this apartheid was through good education, right? Like many parents at the time who could afford it, who could find a way to get their kids into really good schools. But of course, once you're now at this school in a suburb in Pretoria and you're going home to a township in the afternoons, the disparities become very, very clear. What this one world looks like versus the one that you come from, and the danger associated sometimes with going to school particularly during the 80s. And even if you could, I guess, later within the 80s into the 90s, leading up to 1994, there was definitely a sense of what was to come, a new South Africa was on the horizon. But for a long time, I think for our parents, it wasn't clear that that was definitely going to happen. They just didn't know when Mandela was going to come out of jail, if ever. And so what they had at their disposal was, to pull their resources together and educate their kids as best as possible, and, infuse us with, I don't know, as positive an upbringing as they possibly could. And so I think, reading became a huge part of my life. My father, I remember him like he used to subscribe to Reader's Digest.
Yes, we were also
Yeah.
Reader's Digest household.
We were one of those households. And so these became like my little magazines where I would read them from beginning to
Literally
end.
little magazine.
Exactly. I was like, oh, I thought they were just being delivered to me because my,
Sorry to push your mouth.
exactly. But reading, I mean, I read anything that I could get my hands on. And at some point through Reader's Digest, my father got like a, what do you call it? Like a compendium or whatever, like a whole collection of Charles Dickens books, which then became like, stories that we read at night. And I mean, I read a lot of Charles Dickens at an absurdly young age for such intense literature. And another guy named Neville Shute, who I think is an Australian writer, whose books I've never read since. But at that particular time, I was quite obsessed with Charles Dickens and Neville Shute. And thus began a love for words and writing and reading, and slowly starting to, as you know, at that point, you don't really understand what's happening in South Africa. But when you begin to, and you begin to find ways to talk about it and express it, for me, writing was a way to start exploring this. At school, at home, I kept a journal from a very young age, and so writing became a way that I was exploring what was happening in the country. And I was a bit outspoken as a young person, so I was wanting to engage in these conversations, whether through school debates or discussions, or I don't know, even school plays or speeches, or I wanted to talk about what was happening in the country, to the extent that I think when I was around 12, I actually decided that I wanted to become a politician. Mandela was inaugurated when I was 11. And I thought if he can become the first black president, I can become the first woman president. I thought
It's still something that hasn't been done. So, Lindy, we're waiting.
I don't think that politics is in my future anymore. Not at all, in fact. But at the time, it was very much a path that I thought I wanted to follow. But it was a very naive thought. I just wanted to make a difference. I wanted to be part of what's the promise of South Africa. The promise of what South Africa held at the time, right? Like that promise of a new country and a new future and a new hope. I think I really wanted to be a part of that. And I think journalism became the path eventually, and it was a good path for me. But yeah, I think definitely the seeds of that were just born from a childhood full of books, and a childhood in which words were a way to express and explore, the world around me. Yeah.
That's a really beautiful way to describe where your love for words and the importance of books and literature in your life in that season. I know mostly like people from Zim, Kenya that went there, then like actual South Africans that went there. How was that experience like? Was it your first time like interacting with I guess like a more foreign population?
I think in terms of numbers, possibly, yeah. Because, I mean, at the school that I'd gone to, St. Mary's CSG, there had been a number of students that were coming from other countries around the continent, but never in such big numbers as it was my experience at Rhodes. And to be honest, I loved it. I think it helped me see myself differently as well. Like, I think as South Africans, sometimes we tend to be quite insular in our understanding of ourselves beyond our borders, Like we want to close off what it is to be South African or even African to some extent, to the point that there's like qualifying criteria, you know what I mean? Around your behavior or how you speak or what music you listen to or who you're friends with or who you date. All of these things all these qualifying criteria of what it is to be South African, or disqualifying criteria. But being at Rhodes, I felt that I could not remove myself, but I could see myself beyond my South African identity and begin to engage as an African, right? I could find all these commonalities and all these things that connected me with other people without looking at the borders, but connecting with Zimbabwean girls and Kenyan girls and guys and, people from all over, just to see us all as African and to find, oh my gosh, we've got so much in common, but we haven't explored this. We don't talk about this beyond people from like, South Africa. You grow up thinking of people like from Botswana as close enough to, we have similar languages, so we get each other, but we don't go too much further than that, you know what I mean? In understanding other people and even relating and seeing those commonalities that allow us then to identify beyond our South African identity, to say we're all Africans. And I think that's the biggest thing I gained from that experience. Yeah, and I don't think that's left me since. I think it was even, in fact, ended even more when I moved to Kenya. But yeah, that's probably where that shift began to happen for me, and I'm very grateful that it did.
And when
Yeah.
you think of that time and, some of the, like you said, privileges that you did have to, I guess in a way, distance yourselves as a family, fortunately, when you think of that, do you think of it even then or now, like with the sense of like guilt that you were able to have certain privilege that other people couldn't? Is there a sense of shame, or is it just, I don't know, like if is there any, what else what else is there that
Yeah.
exists in that space?
It's, I wonder if those are the words, shame or guilt. There's an acute awareness of what privilege is and how it operated in my life and how it has operated in my life for most of my life. I don't know that I feel guilty necessarily in the sense that I wish to have suffered.
Yes.
I almost wish that no one would have suffered, of course, And I don't necessarily feel shame because I'm proud of what my father did to help us get through that time. And I'm sure that I don't even know the full story. I'm sure I don't know whether he had to borrow money or beg people, or I don't know what he had to do to ensure that we were safe. But whatever he did, it kept us safe, and he's the reason why I'm here today. But I remember once when I was doing a course through Gibbs, a business school in South Africa related to the University of Pretoria. And we were a group of us that were facilitators on a course for young people. And we did this game, sort of this exercise, where we all stood in a line together like this. And for each, the moderator would read out a sentence like, I have gone to bed hungry, or I've never gone to bed hungry, let's say. I think that's where the game worked. If that sentence was true for you, if the sentence was, I've never gone to bed hungry, and the sentence was true for you, you moved forward. If it wasn't true for you, you took a step back. And it continued like this. I went to a private school, you took a step forward. If the sentence is not true for you, you take a step back. And it continues. I have a university degree. I have a car. I have DSTV. I have whatever. Some of them were really deep things. Some of them were fairly superficial. But in the end, they reflected privilege, right? So by the end of the exercise, this mixed group of people, mixed in race and gender, but in age group, we were probably all in our mid 20s to mid 30s. And by the end of the exercise, I was quite close up in the front of the room. The only people in front of me were white men, and all the other black people in the class were behind me. So in that exercise, I became very acutely aware of how privileged I was as a black person in South Africa to have had the experiences, the education, the safety, the support, the middle class life that I lived. I think that was a very hard hitting moment for me, and it created a deep sense of awareness of just how privileged I had been. Yeah, I think in that by the end of the exercise, the people that were in front of me were white, right? Some of them, I'd had good jobs. I'd worked in news. I really, I've never taken that for granted. And ever since, it's been an exercise that I kind of just do in my head, right? Like I think about it when I'm in a room, when I'm engaging with different people, when I'm just aware. I'm aware now. Yeah.
Thanks. I think maybe another offering would be shame, guilt, and gratitude.
Yeah,
Along with what you
exactly.
said about awareness, and that awareness prompting a sense of gratitude. And the reason I ask that is now when we look at South Africa, past the promise. I don't know. Do you think we're past the promise? Now I look at South Africa and we are here, which is part of why I also started this podcast, because I'm trying to figure some of these, more difficult things out. We're here in positions of privilege, and you look back at what's going on in South Africa specifically and on the continent in general. And it's, thinking through, how do we, embrace the privilege that we have? Is it with guilt that survivors get that oh my gosh, I get to be here, and people back home are dealing with load shedding, stage 8, and you hear about the crime, and just it's an election year, and all of those things that you feel, I guess, how to then hold the truth of your privilege in this moment, but also not negating the difficulties and challenges of people that are like you in an environment that you're familiar with?
I think it's a really good question. I mean, I think in many ways, being away from home doesn't completely, separate you from the realities of home. We've left many people that we love at home whose daily existences are a matter of concern for us on a daily basis, and whether it's through support financially or being available emotionally or visiting as often as we can, or I think we're very much engaged in the realities of what South Africa is going through. Most of us, I think, expect or plan to participate in elections. At least I certainly do. I remain, invested in our democracy, and I want to participate in it. So my being away doesn't change that. And that gratitude translates into giving as well, right? Like, I'm very much aware of what it means to have this job, to live here, to earn in US dollars. But that doesn't become some kind of, selfish money pot for me or something like that. Everyone I love benefits from this somehow.
Yeah.
And everyone I love.
The spirit of Ubuntu.
Exactly. Exactly. And the people that love us are actually supportive of this. They're not saying, come here and suffer with us. You know what I mean? They're actually saying, go, thrive, prosper. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Every time I go home and I'm like, guys, I want to come home. They're like, don't you dare. Exactly. Come back to do what?
For what? I get the same reaction, honestly. People like, just go live your life, enjoy, be there and thrive. Why rush back home?
Yes. And I think that's a big, I guess, kind of, and then tying back to what we discussed about, sometimes South Africans having a very insular view around things. Do you think that view also is tied to class in a way?
Yeah, to some extent, I think it's tied to class. And I think when it comes to, from a political perspective, I think it's exploited by politicians as well.
I think I'll let you discuss that, keep on that train, but I also then want to talk about, I mean, we can't deny, and it's something that I've spoken with other people around, maybe then we can then move into your time in Kenya, the view that a lot of Africans have around South Africa, South Africans being quite xenophobic. So as you're responding to that, just tag that piece on.
Yeah. I remember people always asking me that in Kenya, but why do you guys hate us so much? Why do you hate your fellow Africans so much? And it fills you there with guilt and shame.
Yes.
That makes you feel terrible. But I do think that that we can detect a political agenda here somehow as well. I think, politically speaking, the pressure on the government to provide, because the government has a responsibility to some extent to help people, to support a livelihood for people, right? Which means jobs, and it means healthcare, and it means access to basic services, exactly, education, etc. And where the state is not able to provide that, it's almost easier to find a scapegoat to say, we're trying so hard to provide all of these things for you, but then these guys come and they take your jobs, they take your woman, they take your whatever, they take your streets, they take everything. So look at them, you must go shout at them, And so it fuels this sense of these people, they come here and they just ruin our country and they take everything of ours. And that's where the fight becomes, where essentially your government is failing you, right? You have the right to receive certain level of, support from the state. And there is a responsibility on the state to provide certain things. And where it's failed to, I do think that it has created a scapegoat out of foreign nationals. But and this is happening in many other countries too, right? But in South Africa, it's taken a particularly violent turn.
Yes.
I'm not sure where that comes from. Why does it turn into such a violent form of
But I think, where did that anger from pre-94 dissipate to? I think there's also that as well. So yeah. I think that still, that hostility, that, the promise, I don't know, Lindy, would you say the promise was fulfilled?
No, the promise was not fulfilled. The promise was not fulfilled. And to make matters worse, like there seems to have also been some, okay, so even the apartheid government, like during apartheid, let me start there. During apartheid, African countries were fully supportive of the apartheid struggle. From our neighbors in Lesotho and Botswana to Zambia to Nigeria to, it was only when I was in Kenya as a full grown adult that I learned that civil servants in Nigeria had a portion of their tax, were taxed a certain amount of money from their salary that went to supporting the struggle in South Africa. It was called the
Wow.
Mandela tax. Imagine.
I've never heard about that.
Exactly. Any civil servant, if you worked for the government, you paid a small tax that went to supporting the struggle against apartheid. That is the extent to which we had so much support on the continent. But from the apartheid government's perspective, it wasn't in our interest to know this. They wanted Black South Africans to feel alone. You don't have anybody out there fighting for you, rooting for you, willing to die for you. No, 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 no. All you have is us and these rules, right? Like all you have is the apartheid state. You have your little homelands or whatever. This is all you've got. You've got no one out there fighting for you. So we just didn't know this stuff. And then suddenly 1994 comes and we're not educated about it. We're not educated about the fact that these people are, in fact, all of these stereotypes about what the rest of Africa was like, it was in the interest of the apartheid government for us to maintain those stereotypes in a sense to say, there's nothing for you out there. The rest of Africa is just some village. Here, at least the apartheid government is giving you this and this and this and this. What do you want out there anyway? So we didn't even, like our education system didn't even create room for us to learn about what was happening in the rest of the continent, And that, largely speaking, has not changed. South Africans are not like fully well educated about what is happening on the rest of the continent. It's starting to change. Education, news, music, like pop culture,
Socially,
Instagram. Yeah, like now. Exactly. Now it's evolving and changing. But I mean, for most of my life, education wise, I don't think I learned much about the continent until university. And again, created just the personal relationships I established with people from around the continent and from Zimbabwe and everywhere else, But, yeah, and I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in re-educating South Africans about, first of all, the history, but even the contemporary aspects of identifying as Africans. And just to add to that one last thing, like when I lived in Kenya, in South Africa, like we refer to ourselves by, like when we speak racially, we refer to ourselves by the color, right? Like I'm black, or this person's white, or this person's colored, or whatever. But in Kenya, no one calls themselves black. Like they just don't use the term black. You're either a Kenyan or you're not, or you're an African. You can be an African. But say, for instance, if I'm in Kenya and there's two Lindys, no one will say the black Lindy. You say the African Lindy,
Sorry,
right?
guys. That must have been very loud. I didn't mean to cackle like that, but
But you know what I mean?
yes. And for the thing is, like, as you're unpacking this trauma, and I actually think now you have a very unique perspective to this, and I want to unpack your time in Kenya. Now, let's move to your time in Kenya. You now moved from South Africa in all the whatever that, however we're defining that right now, but at least let's say socially, racially, to Kenya, which is like you've just alluded to. They don't define themselves by race; they define themselves maybe by a tribe, or like I'm from this part of the country, I'm from the coast, I'm from Wewe.
Yeah, exactly.
And now you're living, I guess, in a predominantly Black country. What was that experience like? Did you feel, was it cathartic or was it weird? It can even be weird because it's not something you're used to.
I think in the beginning it felt because my time in Kenya initially, in my mind it was going to be temporary. It felt like a discovery. It felt like I was exploring this world that I had never lived in before, But over time, I began to realize how much more at ease I was there. And what it took was returning back to South Africa and feeling suddenly all this tension come up inside me and reacting to voice, even at the airport, like when I was in the Jomo Kenyatta airport in Nairobi, flying to South Africa. And by the time you're in the country, you remember, like just your body remembers to react.
The body keeps score.
Right? Exactly. And so you feel again all this tension. You feel almost ready for a fight a lot of the time. Do you know what I mean? You feel confrontational. You feel ready. You're ready. Like, come. What do you want? What are you going to say? What are you going to say to me? You know? So, and then you go back to Kenya and there's none of that. Like, then I would start to really feel it when I went back. Just this ease and this complete comfort in my skin and my body and myself, you know? Yeah, Kenyans are also kind people and they're very much not judgmental in ways that, I don't know, you know, you just, people didn't instantly read me as South African. But when they did, they were very welcoming, you know? Apart from, like, I guess, even when people ask questions about xenophobia, they ask from a place of like genuine curiosity, like, why is it like that? But for the most part, they're quite excited. They're quite happy to meet someone from South Africa. And they know a lot about South Africa. They want to talk about your music. They want to talk about your history. They want to talk about your sports teams. They want to, you know what I mean? Like, and you feel quite, what's the word? Like humbled by it, you know? How generous people are with their kindness, with their humor, with their spirit, how much they know about your country. Like, I felt very welcomed there. I felt, again, it was a space where I walked into a space that I didn't know very well, but within a relatively short time, I felt immersed in it. I felt welcomed in it, you know? Yeah, some of the best years of my life.
I really love that. And
Mm,
I think something that you've spoken about, we'll just dip into your time now in the US because you've just brought this up and I want to stay on this string. Talking about that sense of ease in your body in
mm,
Kenya that,
mm,
you didn't feel in South Africa and now you're in the US
mm,
where it has its own level
mm,
of dynamics. Where are
mm.
you on a scale of South Africa, Kenya? Like, is it better? Are we past that?
Mm. Kenya is still at the top of that feeling, definitely. Um,
And South Africa is still at the bottom?
no, actually, I don't think South Africa's at the bottom, but this is the first time I've considered this. I don't think South Africa's at the bottom. What I do appreciate about America is that conversations about race are loud and are real and are present in the newspapers and on social media. And, you know, you have like Black Lives Matter Road or whatever. Like you have, it's such a prevalent part of this society's conversation. So you can feel like you can immerse yourself in those conversations and you'll find a lot of voices here that relate to South Africa's struggle or a lot of voices academically and journalistically that are just saying the right kind of things, you know? And there's like a movement, a momentum, you know? So like, you know, my husband is Italian and I guess there was a time when we maybe thought we might move to Europe. And one thing that worried me about moving to Europe is that that kind of voice, that movement in support of Black lives is not as loud as it is in America. So there, advocating for your rights as a Black person, I perceive as being much harder than it would be, say, here in America. I think if something happened to me in a hospital and I felt I wasn't treated fairly because of the color of my skin, there would be an understanding of how that is possible in America. And this is where you can go for help or for redress or for justice or whatever. But I don't know that those conversations are particularly advanced in European countries where the dominant narrative is still very much like nationalistic and
Yeah.
anti-immigrant. And at least in America, as much as that sentiment can be there, the voice of reason, the voice to fight for justice in a world of non-racialism is very loud, very strong, you know, and something that, yeah, you can find connections, you can find a link into that as a South African, I think.
Considering the move, communicating that to friends and family that you're going to do this, what were some of your considerations as you were, moving into that chapter for the first
Moving,
6 months and then
yeah.
ultimately what then became 7 years?
At the time, it felt like such a good opportunity. And it really was. I had been working for ENCA at a time when there were a lot of shifts and changes in the company, and they ended up shutting down the Africa department where I worked. And I had the opportunity to sort of go back into local news, but at that time, it was a bit of a crowded space and it felt like a step backwards. So the opportunity to move after reporting on African countries and traveling a little bit at ENCA to different countries on the continent to actually go and live and work in Kenya felt like such a good plan for me, such a good path for me. And it really was. I think we had also lived in Botswana as a family. So Yeah, it wasn't the first time that. By the time we lived in Botswana, I was already in university, so my experience of Botswana was just like family or school holidays, really.
Mm.
But at least the family had this familiarity of like going outside of living outside of the country, and a
Yeah.
familiarity with being in another African country. But Kenya did seem a bit of a stretch, I think, for some in the family. Like, oh, okay, so you're going deep
Africa.
there in Africa, exactly. I think my mom said something like that. You know, you're going to deep Africa now. But it was really, really an amazing time. And I think part of it was because I was like 31, 32 and I moved there. I was single. I had this job, and it was at the time, like, the biggest, best job I'd ever had. I had travel opportunities. I made friends very quickly. I had such an appetite for meeting new people and for just going out and having long conversations late into the night with lots of wine, like it was just, I had a lot of energy for that. Which is quite different to moving here now at 40, married, just older, like, not drinking all the wine in the world anymore. But back then, I think I found my rhythm in that city very quickly. And I made incredibly, really, really great friends. Many of them Kenyan, like friendships that I think will last me a lifetime. And that really sort of brought me into beyond just the workspace, really understanding society and even the tensions within society, the politics,
Mm.
the history, the socioeconomic dynamics, yeah, it was a space in which I grew a lot. Work-wise, though, at some point I stopped growing. And I knew after around about year 4, year 5, that it's time for this to end. And I started applying for jobs, looking for new opportunities elsewhere. But then at that point, it was actually just the beginning of 2020. And it just became impossible to do
Yeah.
anything or go anywhere. So I was just looking for new opportunities to allow me to maybe stay in Kenya or maybe move back home, but, sort of have a floating kind of remote work situation, And so then the America thing came as this opportunity that just came out of nowhere, really. Like I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't planning for it. I wasn't praying for it. It just happened. And that's how Kenya ended, just like that, But
As they say in Sex and the City, and just like that, then you moved to the United States.
Yep.
And what was that build up like? I mean, compared to Kenya, where it was the place, I guess you were prepared, you spent time, you'd worked in the African newsroom at ENCA, you had, like you were ready, you had a context of the environment you were stepping into, it was something you desired. Whereas coming here, thank you for sharing that. I didn't even know that. It sounded like, the circumstances unrolled and unraveled themselves in this way. How did you embrace that?
In the end, it felt too good to say no to. It felt like, yeah, I see this opportunity and this job as another thing to be grateful for, right? It again comes back to that place of gratitude. It's become a very important opportunity for me, and I don't take it for granted. And working for this organization, I don't take that for granted. But I think it took a lot of self-convincing that this was, because it didn't come from a dream or a hope or a plan or an ambition, I didn't know how to align it with a sense of purpose. And I think I've struggled with that for quite some time. Like, I knew that journalism was something important to me, telling stories, being involved in the biggest news stories of the day, interviewing people. That felt like a sense of purpose. Whereas moving strictly into comms in a corporate environment in this, big bank, like it just was never part of my plan. So while I'm really, really grateful for this opportunity, I think what was hard for me was that shift into seeing how this aligns with a sense of purpose. Some of that journey is still happening. Like, I'm still figuring that out.
Yeah.
I don't know, exploring other things that you might not have had the chance or the space to do if you were not here. It's about exposing yourself to people and spaces and places that would otherwise not be part of your life. And sometimes I intentionally seek out very American experiences, right? Things that I'll never do anywhere else, like watch an NBA game, right? Just because this is like it's just, I'm here and I must be in it. I must live in it. I must immerse
Yes.
myself and put my feet in and get my feet wet and just, rather than skate along as though, I don't know, as though it weren't happening. So yeah, I see it as like the things that I'm grateful for already, like beyond the work itself is really, the friendships, the connections, the
And
experience.
talking about, let's delve a little bit deeper into connection. So you spoke about your community in Kenya, what that looked like. It was distinctly Kenyan. It was also, international, and also the energy that you had, I guess, to build and seek out that community. What does your community in the US look like?
I must say it's been strangely a little bit harder than I anticipated in terms of connecting with Americans, or at least building what feel like genuine connections with many Americans. And other people that I've spoken to have said it gets easier when you have kids, or so then, children that play together, or maybe when you join a church, which I haven't done, or like very particular community spaces become easier ways to meet Americans. But also people that are dating, like they'll meet Americans more, I think. So I've struggled with that a little bit. And ironically now, my friendship circle is quite foreign, more so than it was in Kenya. A lot of South Africans, a lot of other people from other parts of the world. I hope that changes now that we're entering into year 2. But I'm surprised by the fact that it's not very American at all.
So, episode 10, now I can sit and tell you this. That is not, don't take it bad. It's not a unique challenge. It's not a challenge that's unique to you. Every person who's been on this podcast has exclaimed and expressed the same thing, how difficult it has been. So also connecting with, other Nigerian Americans, and then they will then also come with their circle of their own African American or American friends. So making that effort as well. And it is time. It's so easy, comfortable to always want to be around people that already know you or can understand where you're coming from. A lot of things you have to explain, and you have to be open to being offended often. So there's that part.
When was the last time you were offended?
It's like when you date guys, then they try and do the African accent, and you're just
gosh, really?
Really?
Oh no, I'm so sorry. That's terrible.
Last question in this section. Around community. Obviously, your culture is a very big part of your of community. So how have you been finding ways to preserve your culture in this environment, or certain traditions that you observed or that were important to you, either as a family or just as yourself, that come from South Africa?
That's a good question. I think food has been one way to do that. I've been trying more and more often now to cook more and to create foods that remind me of home. Even if they're not particularly unique recipes, I recently made oxtail just because it reminds me of home and the kind of food that just comforts you during winter. It feels like a portal sometimes. Music can just be such a beautiful escape to reconnect me with language and stories and feelings and histories and memories that I crave and that I desperately need to reconnect with. And I think making time for friends and family, just even if it's phone calls or, that is a really important way for me too. But I know, I don't know. No, that's the end of that. I think it's been mainly music and food that have been my portals to home.
And those are, really good and powerful portals. On the music part, do people here ask, oh my gosh, you're from South Africa? I'm a piano?
And I really don't like that genre. I don't know if I should be admitting that out loud. Maybe you can cut that part out.
No,
I'm not the biggest fan, let's say. I mean, I appreciate it and I'm very impressed by what it's achieved as a genre in terms of the global music space, right? I'm really impressed, especially, or what I really like the most is that it's become a platform for partnerships and collaborations with Nigerian musicians and, people from all over the world. I love that it's bringing people together. I love that. But if you ask me, like, what am I listening to? It's not Amapiano. It's just not. I'm sorry. It's just not on my playlist at all, actually.
Oh gosh, no! Like as a person who's like going out, I mean, with the energy that you moved to Kenya with, of being
Yeah.
out, connecting no way do I go, no place do I go not there. Let me ask you, you're from South Africa. I'm a piano. Can you do that dance? Can you do this
Oh
dance?
my
And you're
gosh.
just like,
No.
I'm also watching on TikTok like you. I'm here with you. How am I supposed to let this end? I'm here.
Exactly.
And I think that's a pretty good segue to go into our rapid fire section. So,
Okay.
be as rapid or as, non-rapid as you. Kindling fire, call it kindling fire questions, because sometimes I want to go deeper. Home or here?
Home. Yeah, that's an easy one. Definitely home. Yeah.
What's your favorite food at home?
I think just because of this craving at the moment, I'm going to have to say umngqusho.
Can you tell the people what umngqusho is?
It's basically samp and beans cooked together, stewed nicely over quite a long period of time. You can add some stock for a bit of flavor, top it off with some aromat before you serve it. One of my aunts used to serve it with mincemeat as well, actually. Just to add a bit more richness. And it's just very, very comforting. It reminds me of my aunts. It reminds me of home. It's just, good food.
I actually have it. Maybe I'll make it. I don't think I have the right pot for it.
Very specific pot for this.
Like, see, I don't have my pot. I don't have the right pot for it. This is why I haven't made it yet. What song and artist would you recommend as a really good entryway into this South African music that gives to you a feeling of what South Africa is?
I think my answer to this question could change almost every week, right? Because I listen to a wide variety of music from many different genres, except for Amapiano. But this week, the answer to that question is Mandisi Diankis, who I really enjoy. He's kind of like this crossover between, I wouldn't say gospel, but I'd say choral tradition and jazz. And one of my favorite songs by him is Mabapile, which speaks of healing. And it's just a beautiful message about almost why we sing and what music can do, right? Like for those who are hopeless and for those who are sad or for those carrying a heavy burden, we sing for those people, we sing for you, and we sing for healing. I really, really love that song. And I really enjoy him in general. But as I say, that answer can change almost every given week.
What's a favorite memory from back home? A memory that endures, that you go back to again and again?
Oh my gosh. Memory that endures. We used to spend Christmas in Port Elizabeth or Gqeberha now. And I have a very beautiful memory of the last Christmas we spent there. We don't do so anymore as a family, but my sisters were still young. They were just so little. And it's just the way that we used that house and that space. My brother and my dad used to play cards for hours, just playing cards late into the night. My sisters and I watching TV and music videos and making up dances and songs. A lot of swimming, spent a lot of time just in water, just swimming. And that last year, my Christmas present from my sisters was the Beatenberg CD, because I really used to, when Beatenberg first came out.
Beatenberg song! Don't you think Beatenberg is South African?
Very, very South African. That's another one I would add to that list. And so that Beatenberg soundtrack, just like that Beatenberg album, became the soundtrack of that holiday. And whenever I hear like the music from that album of theirs, I think back to that particular really, really special holiday. Yeah,
that sounds really, really beautiful. Thanks for sharing that and for bringing up like Beatenberg. That is a very, very sad. I like their music. I do like. I think it's
Yeah. That's enjoying a lot.
comprehensively representative and inclusive. Rainbow Nation.
Mhm.
It's Rainbow Nation music. You already mentioned this a little bit earlier. You said you try and immerse yourself in very American experiences. So what are some of those?
Mm.
Like, what is a very American thing that you've experienced where you're like, nowhere else in the world do they do this? And you've allowed yourself the chance
Mm.
to go for it.
So the first one and the main one I would say is definitely the NBA game. I'm not particularly like keen to do it again. Not to say that it wasn't interesting. It was, but it was just, I don't know. It was very American. It was very interesting. It was a cool experience. I'd be keen to try a couple of other sports, maybe like baseball or something, just
I was about
to
to say, do not do
survive.
baseball. It
But
is,
do not.
unless if you have a way to entertain yourself apart from the game.
That's what everybody says. Like the pauses in between are so long. That's what it also felt like at the basketball. I was like, so now another break, another timeout, another. Nothing is like what you think it's gonna be. That's been something about America, right? Like somehow things are just not what they appear to be. What you think they're gonna be? Yeah, you got to
Mm,
manage your expectations a bit.
that is the key thing, is the
I know.
lesson. What is something new? Talking about managing expectations, what is something new that you've learned about yourself here?
So as much as I've always felt like quite strong and independent and able to do anything, I think the US challenged me in ways that I hadn't anticipated. And I've learned to be a bit kinder to myself about struggling. Yeah. Yeah. That's something new. Yeah. Yeah. I
That's
think that's
good.
it.
Honor your body, be gentle with yourself.
Mm, mm.
And in doing that, what is something that you're holding on to from home about yourself?
I think journaling has been something, and sometimes I lose it a bit, and I'll go a few weeks without writing. But as soon as I find my rhythm again, I find myself again. So when I
Mm,
feel a bit too lost, I know I need to sit down and write. So that's something that has grounded me and steadied me, and I need to be more consistent about that. Um, I think it's also something about just seeing myself, seeing the whole picture of me, and loving what I see. I think I'm past the age now where you try and fit in to make friends or to feel like you belong in a certain space. So I'm embracing myself, flaws and all, weaknesses and all. And that's not easy. It's not always easy. But I think, yeah, just seeing the whole picture of the journey I've traveled and the person I've grown into being has been, has been something important for me. And it's what I hold on to a lot more now than I would have before. Yeah.
and this is a question that's very much only for you. And adding that, so in going through this time, this period where you are, embracing yourself and learning new things about yourself, also in a new season as, for the most part, really a newlywed. How do you think traversing the season of being a newlywed in a new country, and how is that, all combining? How does that, all cook together in this place?
I think I'm glad that my husband and I moved here and got married quite quickly, like within a month of moving here. And it's just kind of put our relationship in a completely new place. And I think if we had stayed in Nairobi, we probably wouldn't have rushed to get married. We probably would have delayed it or postponed it. I feel a lot of the difficult things about moving here. If I hadn't have done it all, if I hadn't have moved, I just know that my life wouldn't have changed and I would have been experiencing a stagnation that would have been incredibly destructive for me. I already was experiencing that. I had a very worrying relationship with alcohol, for instance. I mean, it wasn't something super problematic, but like it was a regular feature in my life. And that's changed and it wouldn't have changed if I hadn't moved here. My husband and I are closer than ever before, and I don't think that would have happened if we hadn't moved here. I don't think we would have gotten married as quickly as we did if we hadn't moved here. We would have just delayed it. I know we would have. We were talking about starting a family and building a whole new life, and we're embracing the fact that we're just reached 40 and we're taking ourselves more seriously. We're behaving like adults. We're just, well, let me speak for myself. I'm behaving like an adult, and I'm being much more mature. And I needed a transition. I needed something. I needed to have left that space. I wasn't growing at the pace I needed to. And I think as life begins to change and I prepare for more in this life, I prepare for potentially a family, etc. I need to be this person for that future if I want it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because Nairobi was never going to be ready for the big stuff. You know what I mean? The real things that life, that adulting life comes with. So I'm grateful for that. Very much so.
Thank you. That is, so poignant, so lovely. I wish I met Nairobi Lindy. I love this Lindy, but I feel like me and Nairobi Lindy, we would never had a time.
We would have. I'm telling you, my friend, we really would have.
Time, or we would have had a time. It's okay.
Oh my gosh.
Just two more questions in this section. There's actually three, but what form of non-financial support do you wish you had upon arriving here?
I was lucky in that I had two very close friends that were already living here, one of whom was actually a colleague. So I had a lot of support at work. I had a lot of support with moving and getting settled, finding things, understanding the city, navigating public transport. I really did. I moved without my husband, so I was very fortunate to have people to lean on when things got a bit difficult and when I felt a bit alone. I think I wasn't prepared for how lonely it could feel, though, and how drastic the time difference is, meaning that when you get home from work and you just need to talk to someone, everyone who's abroad that you love is asleep. And so when I first came and I arrived as it was transitioning from autumn into winter or fall into winter, the nights felt so long. And I wish I had been a bit more prepared for that. I think I just hadn't lived alone in a long time. I hadn't done a lot of stuff alone in a while. So suddenly just having these incredibly long, lonely nights was hard. But I was lucky enough to have had some great support in those early days. So yeah, it was very helpful.
That's good. I think I like hearing what making the transition to the US.
You know what? I think something you said has struck me as something that I want to take forward. And that's about being intentional about connections. Because if you're not intentional, you'll find yourself in a bubble. So that's one thing and taken from you that I think I would want to adopt and share with others. For the next, I think if somebody like Nairobi Lindy should have been told that the immersive experience that one has in a place like Nairobi is quite unique and that you might not necessarily find that elsewhere. Or you might not find that in the US in the same way or at the same pace or the same time. It might come later, but it might take a bit longer. And in the interim, I think it's really great to appreciate the things that are working and the things that do feel good and the relationships that are evolving and budding and the friendships that you're making. Like it's still a great place for great opportunities here. And I think in that time one needs to just make the most of the experience. And that can mean many things. It can also mean using it as a time to invest in yourself, right? In your health, in your fitness, in your relationships. And it's a society that, I don't know, maybe to some extent can facilitate a certain kind of growth if you allow it.
Yeah.
Not to say that others can't, but other places can't do that. But I do think maybe because we're fortunate enough in the space in which we work, but there's some really decent support structures. There's really decent, I guess a setup that can help you actually thrive. So the point is to utilize that, I think. I think that was terrible advice, but yeah. Anyway.
I think it's great advice. It's something it's helpful.
Yeah.
It's very helpful. It puts an obligation, not an obligation, but you create your own adventure. That's exactly what I got from that. You create your own adventure.
Create your own adventure.
Yeah. Then the last question, has home become here?
Not yet.
is it something that you could foresee potentially?
I think I'm a little bit resistant to it.
That's okay.
Yeah. For the time being. Sometimes, especially in the early days here, as much as I appreciate, for instance, feeling safe at night and having access to great, live music shows at the Kennedy Center, etc., like it sometimes feels like a bit of a 2D experience. Like it's my life happening on this set that is called America. And I'm
Yeah.
just going, but I'm not like in it. I don't feel in it. And I don't know that I don't necessarily I appreciate the experience and the opportunity to be in this country, and I want to make the most of it and make it my own adventure. But when it comes to realigning myself with a sense of purpose, I think I gravitate towards wanting to go home or in some way wanting to work towards something important at home. I don't know what that is, and I don't know what it looks like. But I went from being like wanting to be a politician at the age of 12 to not at all engaging with, and then becoming a journalist for a very large part of my life in which I did engage with news and what was happening. And I think ultimately maybe home for me is the place where you put your heart, where you put your passion, and I think it's not here. Yeah. I think eventually will be South Africa.
I really love that. That's a great way to to close off. That home is the place where you put your heart and your passion. And I'll just give myself the opportunity to reflect something from what you've said. When I think of my time in the US, like you're saying, you feel like you're living this 2D experience. You're not fully in it. When I think about my time in America, it's like you mentioned, it's great for experiences. You experienced the NBA, went to the Essence Festival. I saw Beyonce, all the Beyonce things, everything Beyonce that she did last year. I was in it. We were together, me and Beyonce. And the money also, but it's fine. But it doesn't, feel like it's the mundane things don't feel good yet.
Yeah.
When I think about groceries or thinking about whatever, just the real mundane things, just having like, oh, here's the whatever. Like on Sunday, me and my best friend would find somehow we end up we're eating together now. Like we're at my house or at her house or at a restaurant, but it was just like a thing that just happened like on Sundays. But now, or just random. Oh, I'm passing by your house. Do you want to go to this special that they sell the toilet paper? I got a voucher to buy the toilet paper. Do you want to come with me? Like those things are not here yet. So it doesn't even then thinking about it being a place to put my heart. I'm not sure, but it is good at giving the big ticket once in a lifetime extravaganza experiences, but the very boring, basic things, it's not quite there yet.
Yeah, I feel you. I like the way you put that actually, because there's something to be said. There is some kind of, I don't know if it's beauty is the word, but something about the mundane that is, I don't know, sometimes some of our best moments happen in that. Do you know what I mean? Like, especially with friendships or connections that are really deep and strong. You don't have to do anything special. You don't have to be going to, a big concert. It's just, I don't know. There is something, that I appreciate about the simple joy of the mundane. And you're right. Like, that's not something that I'm finding here yet.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Well, I know this was an amazing conversation. Thank you so much, Lindy. Thank you for coming on here, for sharing your brilliance, your incredible story, your views. We got to see the journalist side as you put me in the hot seat for a second there. We got to hear, just the tensions that we're all, trying to exist in, which is why I started this podcast. It's really to unpack those tensions and let's name them. And even if we're not solving for them, but at least there's a sense of awareness.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, thank you for having me on your podcast. I'm honored to be your 10th guest. So thank you for taking the time to, invite me and ask these amazing questions and, sit and have this conversation with me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lindy. And to everyone who's listening, as I said, there might be a bonus episode, but you have to be subscribed to find out if there'll be a bonus episode. So stay plugged in. Make sure that you share any of the other episodes from the season with friends, family. Ask questions to our guests, anyone that you want to reach out to. You know, they've all shared their information. Lindy, how can the people get hold of you? What's your LinkedIn? Can they message you on LinkedIn if they want to ask
Yeah,
anything?
my LinkedIn is just my name, I think. I'm very
Okay,
bad at
we'll have her name up, and she's given permission for us to
it.
for you to reach
Yeah,
out on
find me on
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Exactly.
So please do make sure that you take
Yes, Lindy
advantage.
Mtongana on LinkedIn.
Great. Thank you. So make sure that you reach out to the guests if you have any other questions. Thank you so much for being part of this journey. We still have so many places to go, so many stories to unpack, so many, you know, insights to learn. So thank you to the listeners for being part of this journey thus far. And as we like to say here, have the day that you deserve. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed the show and you want to stay connected, make sure that you are subscribed and following us on your favorite podcasting platform, which does include YouTube. Your support means the world to me, and it helps me to keep bringing you this type of content. Also, don't forget to rate the podcast, give us a good rating, and to leave a review, leave a comment, because your feedback also helps to shape the show and it lets me know what type of stuff you guys want to keep hearing and seeing. Lastly, if you have any questions, feedback, suggestions, DM me on our Instagram account, which is Home to Hear. We can't wait to hear from you. Bye, guys.